Hey guys, my name's Emma. I'm from Med Mentors. I'm a final year medical student at Deakin University and I'm here to have a chat with you today about your applications for medical school. So congratulations if you're at this stage, or good luck if you're applying this year, next year, just getting ahead for the future and wanting to watch this video and learn a little bit more about the process. I know it's a really stressful time when you're applying for medical school. I myself have applied 7 times before I finally got accepted. So trust me when I say I understand how stressful it is. And at the moment I'm currently applying for my internship applications, which is an equally stressful process. I understand if some of you are both very excited but quite stressed. Okay, so I thought that we could go through the GMAT applications and have a bit of a casual chat about everything so that you guys know what to do. I created a medical school application checklist, so you'll be able to find that in the link below hopefully, along with a little blog if you'd rather read than watch a video. And you can print out this checklist and tick it off if you like, or just have a look and make sure there's nothing that you missed. I'm just trying to break it down as simply as possible so it's really easy to grasp, you know what's going on, you don't miss any important steps or get confused along the way. I know for me, every time I ask somebody, a peer or a friend, hey, I don't know about this part of the application, can you guys help me? I was met with sort of not the best response. I suppose some people make you feel like you're kind of an idiot. I had to figure out the whole process on my own because I didn't have a lot of really supportive friends around me that helped me at the time. So in case you're in that boat, and I hope you're not, but just in case you are, or you're just scared of asking questions and looking silly in front of anybody, that's what this video is all about. We'll go through everything. But I do just want to say that this video will be based off the year that the many years that I applied, and we'll kind of go through some of the things in the current GMAT guide. But just be aware, some of the things that we talk about by the time you watch this video might be out of date, so just use this as a sort of blueprint and make sure that you do your own research. Okay, so first thing on the checklist is if you are a final year student this year, doing biomed, nursing, engineering, whatever you're studying, if this is your last year and you're applying for medical school this year, well done. But really want you to remember that this year's priority is not the applications, it's not the GMAT, it is your GPA. So trust me when I say that every other step in this checklist can be repeated again and again, year after year. I did it, I know. But your GPA has taken you a lot of work. It's been the last 3 or so years. You really don't want to drop the ball in the last year. You really need a pretty strong GPA these days if you want to be competitive. If you prioritize other things this year, then you might be looking at becoming one of the increasingly large pool of students that are having to do a second bachelor degree because their GPA just isn't as high as it needs to be to get in. So make sure that you're prioritizing your GPA above everything else on this checklist this year if you are a final year student, because it's very important. I know that some schools will say that they prefer the GMAT or they weight the GMAT more than the GPA, so it doesn't seem like GPA is as a vital part, but you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and only go for the schools that don't weight GPA as highly if your GPA isn't that strong. You definitely want to work hard on your GPA to make sure that you can get in it to as many schools as possible because there's very limited spaces. Alright, step 2, you hopefully by this stage have already sat the GMAT. If not, good luck. So you can sit the GMAT either in September or March, and your GMAT score will be valid for 2 years. So that means that you can apply with either, let's say that by the time you're watching this, you're applying for medical school this year. Hopefully it's around May, a little bit earlier than June. So you've already sat the March exam this year, so that's a valid score. Last year's September and last year's March, both valid scores. And then the year before September is a valid score. Basically, you've just got 2 years of your scores before they expire, and when they expire they literally just evaporate into thin air. You'll never be able to get them back, so if you want to keep a record of them, make sure you screenshot them because otherwise you'll never have access to them again. Okay, so the scores that we're aiming for the GMAT, so to be able to apply for medical school, most medical schools require you to have a minimum, a score of 50 in each of the 3 sections, as well as a score of 50 overall. So this can be a little bit misleading because if if you are lucky enough to score a 50 in every section, but exactly a 50 in every section, section 1, 2 and 3, and then get a 50 overall, that's awesome. You've passed every section, but sadly that's probably not going to be enough to get you into medical school. You're going to need to score quite a bit higher in each section, or at least a few of those sections, if you want to be competitive enough. Likewise, if you got a phenomenal score, you're one of those crazy people that scored in the 80s overall, but one of your sections was only a 49, unfortunately, medical schools are unlikely to consider your application at all, which sucks. I have heard of these miracle cases where some schools have overlooked it, but that's really, really rare. So you definitely want to be getting at least a 50 in every section and trying to excel at least one or more sections to make sure that you're getting a pretty competitive score. So there's roughly 15,000 people that sit the GMAT every year with the hopes of applying to medical school. Some of those might be applying for dentistry, some of them might be just doing the GMAT as a practice and they're not going to apply with this score yet, but roughly 15,000 people is who you're competing against, and there's only 1,731 places, that was an estimate, for 2022 across all of Australia. So that's not very many places when you consider how many people are going for them. So the competition is pretty intense. So you want to give yourself the best possible chance of being in the top 2% of all of these candidates to be considered for a spot in medical school. Each medical school will use a combination of your GPA and your GMAT differently, and it's really important that you look into how every school does that, and just be aware that there are pretty big differences between schools. So for example, Deakin combines your GPA and your GMAT score together and then adds bonuses like if you're a rural student or you've had 2 years work experience or you're a previous Deakin student, those will give you some extra percentages towards your final score, and then you'll be ranked, and if you're in the top 2% or so, then hopefully you'll be given an interview. So some medical schools will weight section 3 more heavily than section 1 and 2 of the GMAT, whereas Melbourne Uni, for example, weights them all equally. So this can sort of change your overall score. And most schools rate GPA the same, with your third year being weighted the highest and your first year being weighted the lowest. With the COVID changes, this is a bit up in the air, and some schools are sort of getting creative with how they're going to rank your GPA this year and probably in the years to come. So make sure that you're reading the GMAT guide to keep up to date with how they're going to use the COVID year 2020 in the GPA. Okay, so third on this list is important. Please don't skip this. Do something to celebrate. Surviving the GMAT is a huge deal, and if you don't learn to start celebrating all of your achievements, big or small now, you're never going to do it throughout your medical career, and they're important. Don't want you to get to 80 years old and never having sat down and been like, wow, good job me, I did this, that was hard and I've made it through, and look how far I've come, look how much I've learned. Sit down and do that. It's really important. Making those habits now, you'll be able to take them through your entire medical career, and it'll just make it all so much more rewarding than if you skip it. Watch your favorite movie, get some ice cream, go out with friends, go on a holiday, whatever it is that you want to do to celebrate surviving the GMAT, you deserve it, so do it. Well done. Alright, step 5. This is so important. Back when I was running my Instagram, I would get questions that could be easily answered by reading the GMAT guide every single day, and as much as I tried to help everybody and explain things as much as I could, it's hard being a medical student and juggling so much, so a lot of the time I just sent a link to the GMAT guide and told them, you know, have a good read of this, and if you're still confused after reading it, then we'll talk. And people usually just read through it and realize that it holds all of the answers to all of your questions. So definitely make time to read this guide. I'll put the link below, so make sure that you take the time to sit down and read it thoroughly. This year's is particularly long because of all the COVID changes, so make sure that you're really reading it and making sure that you're around all of these changes. So the process of getting into medical school is pretty convoluted and it's incredibly competitive, so you really don't want to put yourself a year or two behind just because you didn't read the guide. If you're going to play this game, you need to know the rules, and this is your rule book, so make sure that you're reading it. And if you read it last year or the year before, that's awesome, but you're gonna have to sit down and reread it again this year, because every single year they make changes and sometimes they're pretty dramatic. So don't rely on your prep course that you've used, don't rely on rumors, don't rely on your best friend, don't rely on your mum to read it. You need to read it, you need to understand everything in it, and you need to know how this is going to affect your application. Because if you get to the other end and you didn't get in because you didn't quite understand part of this process, you're going to feel really upset about it, and I don't want you to get in that position. You can also bet that at least probably 12,000 of your competitors have already memorized this entire book, so don't be one of the people that missed out. Although we all know at least 1 or 2 people who've never even opened the GMAT guide and still got into medical school. Hey Kate, remember when you were applying for medical school?
Yeah.
Did you ever read the GMSAS guide?
What's that?
No, but seriously, please read the GMSAS guide. Okay. So the learning objectives from reading your GMSAS guide. Just so you know as well, if you're not going to be bothered to read this GMSAS guide, maybe rethink medical school altogether, because we get so many of these guides in medical school and in your training programs in the future. So, you know, get used to reading lengthy guides with words that you've never heard before and a lot of new concepts, because it's never going to stop. Okay, so you're going to want to have a look at your key dates. Do not apply for medical school late, that will be a disaster. You want to have a look at the application process and how it works, how to apply. It's all pretty straightforward, it's all detailed in there. You're going to have a look at the GMSAS consortium schools and their quotas. You're going to have a look at CSPs versus BMPs versus full fee paying places, but we'll get to that a little bit later in the video. You're going to have a look at the sections for applicants in special categories. Maybe that'll be you, maybe it won't. You're going to have a look at the entry requirements for each school and overall, so you know that you're meeting all of these before you apply. You're also going to have a look at how to calculate your GPA, because that's very important and a little bit tricky to do and is a little bit different this year because of the COVID situation. There's sections for the international applicants, so make sure that you're up to date with all of this as well. Each school will have different prerequisites, so you have to make sure that you're ticking those off if you're going to apply to those schools. They also have different entry requirements, they have different calculations, they have different bonuses. Every university is different, and you're going to have to read through every single one and be on top of it if that's the school that you're hoping to apply to. And you also want to know when your supporting documentation, if you have any, is required and when you're sending it. The next thing that we're going to do is look into each and every medical school that you're applying to and find out what makes that medical program unique. Why are you doing this? Because not only is it going to help you pick out which schools you're applying to for next year, but it's also really going to help you get ahead in your interviews as well. If you already know a little bit about the school that you're applying to and hopefully you get an interview there, they really love hearing that you've done a lot of research, and it really pays off when you're interviewing. So back before the era of COVID, before everything was Zoom, you used to have to travel to every medical school and go to an in-person open day. But now, because everything is online and on Zoom, you can literally go to every single school's open day just online and see what they have to offer. When I was applying for medical school, I literally flew to every single medical school that I applied to and went to their open day, and it was amazing. It was way too expensive, but it was so awesome. I got to meet so many members of staff, I got to meet current students, I had a ball. It was awesome. But the thing that you get either in person or on these Zooms is often a lot of information that they don't advertise freely online. That's pretty important to your application and pretty important for your interviews. So it's really good if you can try to attend as many of these as possible for your top preferences. The other thing is that there is no wrong medical school. To be honest, it doesn't matter where you go, you're still going to make a great doctor, because we're so lucky in Australia that we have the AMC, and they make sure that all of our medical schools are of equal standard. All of the schools will have pros and cons, don't get me wrong. And usually those pros and cons are going to be as individual as the person listing them, because we all have different preferences and personalities and things that are important and not important to us. So if you're reading somebody else's pros and cons list or getting advice from somebody else, just take that with a pinch of salt, because maybe those pros and cons aren't exactly relevant to you and your situation. Make your own pros and cons list for each school if you can. Just pick the best school for you and don't worry about what anybody else says about it, just do you. I'd also like to point out that a lot of students always say, I'm not going to apply interstate, or I'm not going to apply to that school because it's too rural, or I just want a particular location and that's what I'm going for. Or I even have a lot of friends that are like, I'm only applying to Melbourne University because I live in Melbourne and I don't want to move, and that's awesome. That's totally fair enough, and if that's you, fine. But I just want to highlight for you that even if you got into medical school at one of these schools, there's nothing that's keeping you at that particular school just because that's where you got in. For example, at Melbourne University, we still have students at Ballarat from Melbourne University, Notre Dame University and Deakin University. Doesn't mean just because that you're at one particular school doesn't mean that you'll be sent somewhere else for your clinical training. Likewise, when you start doing your training program, no matter what specialty you want to go into, it's becoming a bigger and bigger part of all training that you need to go and do some rural experience. This is mainly because of the rural doctor shortage, and as this crisis gets bigger and bigger, there's going to be more of us needing to go more and more rural for more and more amount of our training. So just be aware that if location is a big problem for you and you're unable to be flexible and move around, medical school and medical training is going to be really hard for you. So just take that into consideration. Okay, so what to look at when you're trying to find out what makes each school tick. So you want to start off with every school's website and have a look at their medical school program page and have a good look through that. They usually list all the things that are super important and pertinent for you to know. You also really want to go to their open nights, as we discussed before, because that's where all the little hidden gems will come in. You probably want to check out YouTube. There's a lot of med YouTubers out there these days that give awesome information about what school they're at. You can also check out Med Mentors. Most of our videos so far are from Deakin students, but we've got a lot of other videos coming soon from as many other medical schools as we can possibly get. One of our other med mentors, Emma B MD, you might know her from YouTube. I will link her below as well. Go check out her videos. She's at Macquarie and she has a lot of gem videos that will tell you heaps of stuff about medical school and what it's like to be at Macquarie. My friend Dylan, will link him below as well. He's got some really good videos. He's in Sydney, so you can check out what he's doing at his medical school. And then reaching out to current students is really good as well. So you can reach out to students through Med Mentors or Paging Doctor, or if you go to the open nights and you get some contacts there. Medical students aren't super scary. They're usually really willing to pass on as much information as they can. Always take people's advice and information with a pinch of salt. People usually give you information in a way that sort of reassures their own life choices. Be careful of that. All right, the next step. So now that you've got all of this information, you're going to make a short list of the 6 GemSAS schools that you're interested in, and then decide if you want to apply directly to other schools that aren't GemSAS consortium schools like Sydney, Flinders and Monash if you're able to apply to any of these schools, and just sort of have a bit of a shortlist going. You don't need to order it straight away. You can if you want. Make sure that you've got a shortlist going. The next step, you might want to get a group of friends together to organize this step to make the work a little easier, and we're all about collaboration at Med Mentors. The more collaborative you can be, the better. So you're going to want to email or call each of the universities in your shortlist if you can. This step is optional, but for a lot of people it can be pretty important. Email or call them and ask them what their GAMSAT and GPA cutoffs were for either this year, if they're happy to give it to you, or last year, so that you have a little bit of a gauge of what they're looking for and if your scores are going to meet that this year. You can also ask them how they're going to use those cutoffs, whether combined scores and there's a bit of leeway there, or if that's their actual cutoff and anyone below that this year is not going to be considered. Now that we have all of this information in front of us, we've got our shortlist ready, now we can sit down and preference them. We can rank them in the order in which we want to go to those schools and where we think that will fit in the best. So every year there's heaps of students that try to play the system, but unfortunately there are many stuff ups every year with GemSAS, and playing the system doesn't always work out the way that you thought it would. The best advice is just apply to the schools that you would be absolutely ecstatic if you received an offer to go to that school. Don't apply to schools that you don't want to go to, because it's going to be a waste of your time. And what if you end up going to it? If you have a school in your preference list, it's a viable option. You might end up going there. So just make sure that you're putting down all the schools that you actually want to go to. Preference them in the order that you would love to go to them the most. Your number 1 to number 6. My number 1 preference was Deakin University, and yay, that's where I am now. But I really didn't think that I was going to get in there. I did not think that I was going to get the scores required to actually make it into the program at all. My 3rd preference was Notre Dame Sydney, which is an amazing school. And I was so excited when they sent me an email inviting me for an interview. So I got an interview at my 3rd preference school, prepared for about 3 to 4 weeks for the interview. Could see myself moving to Sydney, could not wait to go to Notre Dame. And the day or two before my interview, I get a phone call from GemSAS telling me that there'd been a mistake with my application, and that actually there were quite a few people that were supposed to be interviewed at Deakin but had been missed. I was given the choice to do either another interview at Deakin in a few weeks' time, or to do my Deakin interview at Notre Dame. So I decided to do my interview at Notre Dame because I've already bought the flight and I'd been preparing for it for weeks. So weirdly, I did my Deakin University interview at the University of Notre Dame, and then I got in. So there's no way I could have played the system to have predicted that. It's just one of those weird things that happen to a handful of us, and weirder things happen every year. So please put down the schools that you want to go to in the order that you want to go to them, because I ended up at my top preference by chance, and if I'd accidentally played the system any other way and thought I don't have the scores for Deakin, I wouldn't have got in. If I'd put it any lower than my 3rd preference, I would never have got in. Alright, so when you're filling out your application, you'll need to decide whether or not you're interested in going for a BMP. So what is a BMP? So a BMP is a bonded medical school place. It is quite similar to a CSP, which is a Commonwealth supported place, which means that when you're accepted, all of your debt goes to HECS and you're able to study for free essentially, and then get it all paid for through your tax when you're earning a certain amount. It's the same for your bonded medical place, except you need to sign a contract that will say that you commit to a return of service, which means that you will be going to a rural area for a certain amount of time that you agree to in the contract when you're a doctor to service an area that is underserved by medicine. A lot of people are afraid of having a BMP. They change from year to year, the amount of years that you're required to return of service. For example, the year that I got mine, I have only 12 months to tick off my BMP. I have peers that have 6 years, and if you're applying this year, then at the moment it's at 3 years. The reason that these years change again and again is because our government keeps changing, and every time a new politician comes in and takes over this particular part of government, they think that, oh my gosh, I have the way to fix the rural doctor crisis. Why don't we just make people sign a contract so they go back and work as a doctor in a rural area? Genius. Although it doesn't work. A lot of people end up paying their way out of it and never go and be a rural doctor or do any service in a rural area. They just pay thousands and thousands of dollars and get out of it. Otherwise, people will go back and they'll be a little bit resentful for being forced to, and then just go back to a metro area in the end, and it doesn't really help anyone because they've left the rural area. At the moment, it's 3 years. There's a lot of reasons why you should be excited about a BMP. For me, it was my top preference, so I'm absolutely stoked that I have a BMP. And even for those of you who don't want to go rural and think there's nothing worse than going rural, trust me, it's still worth it to get a BMP, and I'm going to tell you why. So for those of us with a 1-year BMP, it's going to be basically impossible not to tick that off even just by accident. When we're doing our training programs, we're actually required to go to a rural area for part of our training programs. This is a new incentive by the government to make sure that there are more doctors going to a rural area to help subside some of the crisis. So it is super unlikely that any of us are going to get through our training program without at least 12 months in a rural area, whether it be 8 weeks here, 12 weeks there. All of that helps chip away. For those of you considering the 3-year contract, again, the crisis is only exploding and getting way worse, so we can all pretty much predict that our training programs are going to be moved to the bush at some point, and you'll seriously just tick it off. 3 years isn't that long. It's going to go really fast, and you don't have to do it all consecutively. Depends on your specific contract. It might change, but a lot of the contracts you're allowed to do it in rotation groups, so you might just have an 8-week stint or a 12-week stint, and all of that slowly contributes to ticking this off. A lot of the contracts also give you 18 years to complete your contract. The 18 years is either starting at the end of your medical school or at the end of your training program when you're a consultant. That's a long time for you to tick all of this off. There's also a couple of new opt-in options floating around, so you might want to have a look at those and see if you're eligible for those as well. There's heaps more information on this in the GMSAS guide. There's links that you can click on and you can have a look at all of the current guidelines and considerations that you want to be aware of. And for those of you who are destined to be a metro doctor, that's absolutely fine, but there's still a lot of perks to going rural and getting a BMP. For one thing, a lot of training programs actually give you extra points in your application to getting into your training program. And if you think getting into medical school is hard, wait until you get to training programs. Oh my gosh, it is 100 times worse. So these extra points are actually vital, and you're going to be so happy that you got them. So definitely have a look into that if that's important to you. And then those years in a rural area actually also contribute to points in a lot of training programs. Each training program is completely different and changes year to year for their application and entry requirements, but currently quite a few like having rural experience. Other things that are really important is the flexibility and the hands-on training that you receive in the bush. It's really different to metropolitan medicine. The culture is different, like I said, more flexible training, more hands-on. They're more dedicated to making the environment the way that you want it to be for your teaching and learning, because they want you to stay. So the culture is just amazing. And if it's important to anybody out there, you also get paid more. There's also a lot of financial incentives that help you get your first house. There's relocation scholarships, things like that make it really tangible to get yourself out there. Another thing that's really good for people that want to stay metro in the long run is if you go to a rural area area and do some training there, you're likely going to be the only trainee doctor there, and you're going to get so much one-on-one attention with your consultants, which means that by the time you apply for your next role or your training program, think of how amazing your references are going to be. They're going to be glowing compared to your peers in a metro area who maybe got 15 minutes with one consultant and asked the same doctor to be a reference for them, but they barely know your friend, but they really know you because they did like 20 surgeries with you and you were the first assist. So definitely consider a BMP. For me, it doesn't change anything because I want to be a rural doctor anyway, but there are so many reasons why you should go and do some of your training rural, and I cannot recommend it enough. BMPs are awesome. Don't feel bad if you get one. Be proud. And then there's full fee paying places. So unless you have a lot of money or your family is willing to support you in some way, this might not be for you. The full fee paying places are very expensive and require a pretty big down payment at the start. There's no access to HECS whatsoever with many of them. I was looking into this when I was getting interviewed for Notre Dame because I had applied for 7 years, and even if I got a full fee paying place, I was desperate and I wanted to say yes, but I have no money. So that was going to be really challenging for me. I actually looked into doing an army scholarship, and this is a really good way if you can't afford a full fee paying place but you'd be happy to take one. The army scholarship means that they would actually pay for your entire schooling. You'll have no HECS debt, no debt whatsoever at the end. They also pay you thousands of dollars a year to support yourself, so you don't need to be working or generating an income during medical school, and you just sign a contract and give back a return of service equal to the amount of years that they paid for your medical schooling. So it can either be the full 4 years, 2 years, 1 year, plus an extra year of service. So if you're willing to do that and work as an army doctor for a few years, that's going to set up your whole career. Working with people in the army or the navy is actually a really rewarding role, and I've worked with a lot of GPs who started their career that way, and they still work with a lot of veterans and things now, and they really highly rate their experience and their training that they received through that, and you get a lot of army benefits for the rest of your life as well, which is awesome. And our last step, make sure that you actually apply before the deadline. I know people that got the deadline confused in the past and completely missed it, and that's really sad. So please make sure that you're reading those key dates and apply before the deadline. Make sure you get your applications in pretty early. This will give you a lot of time to do proofreading, which can make a huge difference. Get your friends, get your peers, get your study group, get your mum, get your med mentor, just to proofread your application. Look for any typos, especially if you're applying to a portfolio school. Make sure that you've only ticked the BMPs, CSPs, full fee paying places that you intend to accept. And importantly, make sure that you're applying with an email address that you check regularly. I applied 1 year with an email address that I don't check very regularly, and this was before the days where you could attach all of your emails to your smartphone, and I knew what the key dates were. I knew that I had it a couple of weeks where I just didn't need to, or I shouldn't be expecting any emails, and I didn't check. And it was while I was doing my honours thesis, and I just didn't even think I should check that email. A couple of weeks passed, and eventually I was like, yep, I'll check that email, and I missed a few emails from GMSAS. This crazy thing happened 1 year where there was a glitch, and it meant that everything that you'd written was absolutely illegible. You couldn't read any of it. It looked like that crazy Windigs or whatever it is font. They couldn't read any of your application, and they'd emailed me saying, hi, sorry this has happened to you. We're asking everyone that this has happened to just redo their entire application. And there was a deadline in that email, and sadly I was a day too late, and I wasted a whole year of applications. I wasted my GMSAT scores, I wasted the money that I spent on the application, and I wasn't offered a refund, by the way. And that was it. My application was just toast. I missed a whole year. Could have got in that year and I'll never know. So make sure that you're checking your emails, or they're assigned to your phone or something, because I would hate for that to happen to you, but fingers crossed it never happens again. Also, make sure you have a copy of your application running around somewhere, because if I actually had to fill out that application again from scratch, it would have been the worst because I hadn't saved it either. Make sure you're saving your application just in case. So now that you've done this, you've applied for everything, please have something planned so that you can celebrate this amazing, huge, monumental step in your life. You've applied for medical school. That is amazing. Congratulations. Make sure that you are rewarding yourself for this amazing job. So I hope this video was helpful and has given you a little bit of clarity about what to do, the steps to take, things that you need to be ticking off, and how to handle this whole application process. I know it's really stressful, but I hope you're feeling super excited because this is a massive step. I hope that you get in. Good luck to every single one of you. If you have any questions at all, just reach out to Med Mentors. We're always here for you guys, and we want to make the process as collaborative and easy and stress-free as possible. Bye!